what does that process look like for exclusion removal? What is Pattern's role? Like, what do you guys do when you receive something back with exclusions on it? And, what can physicians expect?
Yes, exclusion removal is such a big thing Pattern does. This is a part of servicing a policy. We don't just sell a policy and never speak to you again. We are so good at Pattern at helping clients remove exclusions. We even set reminders to follow up with clients to remove their exclusion. So when I said that exclusions can either be temporary or permanent, I meant there are certain exclusions that are going to be permanent, especially very severe fractures, just very big if you've had a condition for several years, it's very chronic, that's likely going to be permanent. But there's a lot of, especially for women, mental health exclusions. If your depression or anxiety stemmed out of your stress during residency, so common. I mean, you're working crazy hours. Half these women have families and children and husbands or spouses, and that's a lot going on. And so a lot of times the insurance companies will say, okay, this mental health coverage can be reconsidered, maybe in 2 or 3 years after treatment's resolved. And we do see a lot of our attending physicians, especially who are women, kind of stop taking the medications for anxiety, or that treatment subsides after those long hours. And so they'll reconsider adding that mental health coverage back, and even pregnancy. Clients who have their current pregnancy excluded, you can get that removed as long as you have normal vaginal delivery, no complications during the delivery process, and then you return to work usually for 30 days, full time without restrictions. And once you meet that requirement, you just ask to have the exclusion removed. So a lot of these exclusions come with those, what we call reconsideration periods, which is just the amount of time that needs to pass before they will reconsider exclusion removal. When I say reconsider, you just have to meet that criteria. Usually it's a cessation of treatment or symptomology
Mhm.
in order to actually meet that exclusion removal process.
That makes sense. And I guess, at the end of the day, the most important question is I would like to know how much pattern is present for that role and kind of helps coordinate it because when I hear all of this as a surgeon, as a full-time practicing surgeon, I'm thinking I am getting a little overwhelmed just talking about it, like even just because I can kind of imagine the paperwork. Like I have a very vivid imagination. I'm picturing these piles of paperwork setting time, like remember to do this and then submit these requests and things like that. So is there a role where pattern really helps navigate that and make it a more smooth, less stressful process?
Yes, absolutely. Just like when we help for initial disability, we help for the exclusion removal process. And what that actually looks like, we hold your hand during the whole process, kind of walk you through it, because it can get complicated and it can get hard. But what that looks like is an application, which just requests a removal of whichever exclusion it is. You can have multiple exclusions. You can have one. We could request all. Just depends on what your health history is and your exclusions. You have to usually do a medical questionnaire, which just asks you about that treatment for that exclusion or that disorder that caused that exclusion. Have you had any additional treatment? It's just kind of ask questions. A lot of times, if they need a record to confirm, like sometimes they just need a physician record indicating, hey, treatment's
Mhm.
resolved, especially if there's like PT involved or something like that. Has treatment resolved? Has symptomology like subsided? And they just need to confirm that. And usually the insurance company requests that from the doctor directly. So our physicians don't even need to go out and get their records, and we don't need you to combine them and, compile all that before reaching out. The insurance company reaches out and handles that themselves. If they have questions, they reach out to us. We reach out to physicians, and just guide them through that process. And at the end of that, and usually it takes a few weeks, especially if we need to get a record to confirm everything's resolved, we get an offer back just like normal disability insurance application when you go through it the first time, that just says, hey, yes, we will remove this exclusion. And then the physician just needs to sign a paper saying, I agree, which usually they do, because usually you agree if you get it removed. Or they say, unfortunately, because you actually treated, 6 months ago, we're going to want to wait another year. So that's very
Okay.
often, sometimes the
Mhm.
case, when they find out clients have, maybe gotten a medication they forgot they did 6 months ago or something like that. And then we would just follow up again, and we can resubmit another request for that exclusion removal at that time. when, symptoms resolve and treatment has subsided or ended.
Okay, it's nice to hear. It's reassuring to hear for sure because yes, I can sign a piece of paper, any doctor. That's not too onerous to where that should require some incredible activation energy to get something like that done. Especially when, as you mentioned, like you described it as hand holding, but I remember what it was like to be a resident. If it came to something like this, like life, quote unquote, bigger life issues, kind of like adult responsibilities, paperwork, I wanted my hand to be held. Absolutely. Because, residents, fellows, the workload is extraordinary. And of course, like what they're dealing with day to day, it's
Mm,
often very high stress, high acuity, in many cases. And so, for sure, there's nothing wrong with needing your hand held on something like the DI side, where there are experts who can provide that function very well.